Welcome back to Heart of a Soldier, where we explore the depths of human courage and the power of love to overcome impossible odds. Today's story will touch your heart and remind you that true strength isn't measured by what our bodies can do, but by what our hearts are willing to give. This is the story of Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson and Emma Rodriguez, a tale of two souls who found each other in the darkest of times and proved that love knows no boundaries. Prepare yourself for a journey that will redefine everything you thought you knew about courage, sacrifice, and the healing power of unconditional love. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson had always been invincible. At 28, he stood 6 feet 3 inches tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world and a smile that could light up the darkest bunker. In his hometown of Austin, Texas, he'd been the star linebacker who led his high school to 3 consecutive championships. In the Army, he was the soldier others wanted on their team, the one who could carry a wounded comrade for miles, the one who never backed down from a fight. "Thompson, you're up," Lieutenant Colonel Hayes called out as the Black Hawk helicopter circled over the mountainous terrain of eastern Afghanistan. "Remember, this is a high-value target. Intelligence suggests the compound contains critical information about upcoming attacks on coalition forces." In the Army, he was the soldier others wanted on their team, the one who could carry a wounded comrade for miles, the one who never backed down from a fight. "Thompson, you're up," Lieutenant Colonel Hayes called out as the Black Hawk helicopter circled over the mountainous terrain of eastern Afghanistan. "Remember, this is a high-value target. Intelligence suggests the compound contains critical information about upcoming attacks on coalition forces." The compound looked quiet from above. Too quiet. Marcus had learned to trust his instincts over the years, and something about this mission felt wrong. But orders were orders, and his team was counting on him to lead them safely through another operation. 60 seconds out, the pilot shouted over the roar of the rotors. Marcus was the first one down the rope, his boots hitting the dusty ground with practiced precision. He immediately took cover behind a low stone wall, scanning the area for any signs of enemy movement. The compound appeared deserted, but Marcus knew that appearances could be deadly in Afghanistan. "Charlie team, sound off," he whispered into his radio. One by one, his team confirmed their positions. Sergeant Williams at the north wall, Corporal Martinez covering the rear entrance, Private Johnson watching their six. Everything was proceeding according to plan until Marcus reached for the door handle of the main building. The explosion came without warning. One moment Marcus was reaching for the door. The next he was flying backward through the air, his body twisting unnaturally as shrapnel tore through his equipment and into his flesh. He hit the ground hard, his back striking a concrete barrier with a sickening crack that echoed across the compound. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, but it was the absence of feeling below his waist that truly terrified him. Marcus tried to move his legs, tried to feel his feet, but there was nothing, just a horrible, empty numbness that seemed to stretch into eternity. Man down. Man down." He heard Sergeant Williams shouting, "Thompson's hit bad." Marcus tried to speak, tried to tell his team that he was okay, but the words wouldn't come. Blood filled his mouth, and darkness crept in from the edges of his vision. The last thing he remembered was the sound of the medevac helicopter's rotors beating against the Afghan sky, carrying him away from the life he'd always known. When Marcus finally awakened, the world had fundamentally changed. The first thing he noticed wasn't the sterile smell of the hospital or the beeping of the machines surrounding his bed. It was the complete absence of sensation below his waist, a void that seemed to mock everything he'd once been. "Welcome back, soldier," said a gentle voice beside his bed. Marcus turned his head to see a middle-aged doctor with kind eyes and graying hair. "Where am I?" "Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. You've been unconscious for 6 days. I'm Dr. Patterson, and I've been overseeing your care since you arrived." The memories came flooding back. The mission, the explosion, the terrifying sensation of flying through the air. Marcus tried to sit up, tried to move his legs, but nothing happened. His body from the waist down might as well have belonged to someone else. "Doctor," Marcus said quietly, though he already knew the answer to the question he was about to ask. "My legs, ... double quotes." Dr. Patterson's expression was compassionate, but unflinchingly honest. "The shrapnel from the explosion caused severe trauma to your spinal cord at the L2 vertebra. I'm afraid the damage is complete and permanent. You'll never walk again, Marcus. I'm so sorry. The words hit him like another explosion, shattering what remained of his world. Never walk again. Never run. Never feel the ground beneath his feet. Never be the man he'd always been. My team, Marcus managed to whisper. Are they okay? They're fine. Sergeant Williams has called every day asking about your condition. Your entire unit has been worried sick about you. Over the following weeks, as Marcus was transferred to Walter Reed Medical Center in Maryland, he learned the full extent of his injuries. T12 complete spinal cord injury with paralysis of both legs. Multiple internal injuries that had required surgery. Shrapnel wounds that would leave him scarred for life. But it was the psychological trauma that proved to be the most devastating. The man who had once carried wounded soldiers to safety now couldn't even get out of bed without help. The soldier who had inspired others with his strength now felt like a burden to everyone around him. His parents flew in from Texas. His sister drove down from Virginia. His army buddies called constantly, but Marcus turned them all away. I don't want visitors, he told the nurses repeatedly. I don't want anyone to see me like this. Emma Rodriguez had seen it all during her 5 years as a nurse in the spinal cord injury unit at Walter Reed. Young Marines who would never walk again. Soldiers who had lost limbs. Veterans struggling with traumatic brain injuries. Each patient brought their own story of courage and sacrifice. And Emma had learned to find hope, even in the darkest situations. But Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson was different. For 3 weeks, he had refused all visitors, barely spoken to his doctors, and shown no interest in beginning the rehabilitation process that could help him adapt to his new reality. He won't even try, complained Janet, one of the other nurses. Physical therapy wants to start working with him, but he refuses to get out of bed. He just stares at the ceiling all day. Emma studied Marcus's chart thoughtfully. What would you do if everything you'd built your identity around was suddenly taken away? She asked quietly. I'd probably be pretty angry too, Janet admitted. Then maybe what he needs isn't another person telling him what he should be doing. Maybe he just needs someone who's willing to sit with him in his anger for a while. That afternoon, Emma knocked softly on Marcus's door before entering his room. He was lying in bed, staring at the television without really watching it, his powerful upper body a stark contrast to the motionless legs beneath the hospital blanket. I'm Emma, she said simply, pulling up a chair beside his bed. I'm your nurse for the evening shift. Marcus barely glanced at her. I don't need anything. I know, Emma replied, settling into the chair with a book. I'll just be here if that changes. For the next hour, Emma sat quietly reading while Marcus continued to stare at the television. She didn't try to make conversation, didn't offer empty platitudes about his condition, didn't push him to engage in activities he wasn't ready for. She simply provided a calm, non-judgmental presence in his room. Why aren't you trying to fix me? Marcus finally asked. Emma looked up from her book, meeting his eyes for the first time. Because you're not broken, she said quietly. You're hurt, and you're angry, and you're scared. But you're not broken. Something in her voice, in the simple honesty of her words, cracked the wall Marcus had built around himself. For the first time since the explosion, tears began to roll down his cheeks. I was supposed to protect my man, he whispered. I was supposed to be strong. Now I can't even go to the bathroom by myself. Emma set down her book and moved her chair closer to his bed. Strength isn't about what your body can do, Marcus. It's about what your heart can endure. And you're here. You're fighting. You're alive. That takes more strength than most people will ever understand. Over the following weeks, Emma became Marcus's lifeline back to the world of the living. She was there during his first painful attempts at physical therapy, encouraging him when he wanted to quit, celebrating small victories like successfully transferring from his bed to a wheelchair. I feel like such a fraud, Marcus told her one afternoon after a particularly difficult therapy session. Everyone keeps calling me a hero, but I can't even dress myself without help. Emma was helping him with the exercises the physical therapist had prescribed, her hands gentle but firm as she moved his paralyzed legs through their range of motion. You know what I think makes someone a hero? She asked. What? Getting up every morning and facing another day, even when that day is harder than anything you've ever imagined. You've been doing that for 6 weeks now. That's pretty heroic in my book. Marcus found himself looking forward to Emma's shifts. She had a way of treating him like a complete person rather than a collection of medical problems. She told him about her family, her parents who had immigrated from Mexico when she was 5, her younger brother who was studying engineering, her grandmother who still made the best tamales in San Antonio. What about you? She asked him one evening. Tell me about Marcus Thompson before all this happened. For the first time in months, Marcus found himself talking about his life before the injury. He told her about growing up in Austin, about Friday night football games and barbecue cookouts, about his decision to join the army after 9/11s, about the brothers he'd served with, and the missions that had defined him as a soldier. You talk about all of that in the past tense, Emma observed. Because it is in the past that Marcus Thompson doesn't exist anymore. Emma was quiet for a long moment, then said softly, or maybe you're just becoming a different version of Marcus Thompson. Maybe this version has things to offer that the old version never could. Marcus couldn't pinpoint exactly when he fell in love with Emma. Maybe it was the night she stayed late to help him through a panic attack, holding his hand while he struggled to breathe through the overwhelming fear that sometimes consumed him. Maybe it was the morning she brought him coffee and a homemade breakfast burrito, explaining that her grandmother insisted all wounded soldiers needed proper food to heal. Or maybe it was the afternoon she found him crying in his wheelchair after a failed attempt to navigate the bathroom independently. And instead of offering pity or false encouragement, she simply said, "Some days are harder than others. That's okay. Tomorrow will be different." Whatever the moment, Marcus found himself thinking about Emma constantly. He looked forward to her shifts, memorized the sound of her laughter, found excuses to keep her in his room longer than necessary. Whatever the moment, Marcus found himself thinking about Emma constantly. He looked forward to her shifts, memorized the sound of her laughter, found excuses to keep her in his room longer than necessary. For the first time since his injury, he felt something other than despair. He felt hope. But with that hope came a new kind of fear. What could he possibly offer someone like Emma? He was a broken soldier who couldn't walk, couldn't work, couldn't even take care of his most basic needs without assistance. She was beautiful, intelligent, accomplished. She could have anyone she wanted. Why would she choose someone like him? "I need to tell you something," Marcus said one evening, as Emma was finishing her rounds. "What's that?" she asked, settling into the chair that had become hers over the past few months. Marcus took a deep breath, steeling himself for the rejection he was sure would follow. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Emma was quiet for so long that Marcus began to panic. He'd ruined everything, crossed a line that should never be crossed between patient and caregiver. He was about to apologize, to take back the words, when Emma spoke. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she said quietly. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "How is that possible? Look at me, Emma. I'm not a man anymore. I'm half a man, at best. I can't walk. I can't provide for you. I can't even." Emma reached out and took his hand, stopping his words with the gentle pressure of her fingers against his. "Marcus, do you know what I see when I look at you?" He shook his head, afraid to hope. "I see a man who survived an explosion that should have killed him. I see someone who gets up every morning and faces physical therapy that I know is excruciating, because he's determined to become as independent as possible. I see someone who writes letters to his former teammates to make sure they're okay, even though he's the one lying in a hospital bed. I see someone who has learned to find joy in small victories, who makes me laugh even on my worst days at work, who treats every person in this hospital with respect and kindness regardless of their job or status." Emma paused, her eyes never leaving his. "I see a man who loves deeply, feels deeply, and has the courage to be vulnerable even when he's terrified. That's the man I'm falling in love with. The fact that he happens to use a wheelchair doesn't change any of that." Marcus's recovery took on new meaning with Emma by his side. He threw himself into physical therapy with renewed determination, not because he believed he would walk again, but because he wanted to be as independent as possible for the woman he loved. "I want to take you on a real date," he told her one afternoon. "Not just sitting in this hospital room. A real date where I pick you up and take you somewhere special." Emma smiled, but he could see the concern in her eyes. "Marcus, you know that I don't need. I need it," he said firmly. "I need to know that I can be a man who takes his girlfriend on dates, who can navigate the world outside these walls. Please. 6 months after that first conversation, Marcus had progressed enough to spend weekends outside the hospital. Emma picked him up in her car, which she'd had modified with hand controls so he could drive it, and they went to a small Italian restaurant near the Potomac River. Marcus had practiced the transfer from his wheelchair to the restaurant chair dozens of times, but his hands still shook as he maneuvered himself at their table. The simple act of having dinner in a public place felt like climbing Mount Everest. "This is harder than I thought it would be," he admitted, as he struggled with the unfamiliar sensation of being the only person in a wheelchair in the crowded restaurant. Emma reached across the table and took his hand. "You're doing great, and if it helps, every woman in here is staring at you because you're incredibly handsome, not because of the wheelchair." Marcus laughed despite himself. "You're biased." "Absolutely. But I'm also right." Over the months that followed, Marcus slowly built the skills and confidence he needed to live independently. He learned to drive, to cook simple meals, to navigate stairs and curbs, and all the obstacles that the walking world took for granted. Emma was there for every triumph and every setback, celebrating his successes and holding him through his failures. "I want to marry you," Marcus said, one evening, as they sat on the balcony of his new accessible apartment, watching the sunset over the city. Emma turned to look at him, surprise and joy mixing in her expression. "Marcus, ... double quotes. I know I'm not the man you probably dreamed of marrying," he continued quickly. "I know that being with me means accepting limitations that other couples don't have to face. I know that I'll always need help with some things, that there are places we might not be able to go together, experiences we might not be able to share." Emma started to speak, but Marcus held up his hand. "Let me finish. I know all of that, but I also know that I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. I know that you make me want to be the best version of myself, wheelchair and all. I know that when I imagine my future, you're in every single moment of it." Marcus pulled out a small velvet box, his hands trembling as he opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Emma Rodriguez, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Emma's face as she looked at the man she'd fallen in love with, not despite his wheelchair, but because of the incredible strength, courage, and capacity for love that his journey had revealed. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." Marcus and Emma's wedding was small, but perfect, held in the garden of the rehabilitation hospital where they'd met. Marcus's army buddies served as groomsmen, and Emma's family flew in from Texas to celebrate. The ceremony was conducted by the hospital chaplain who had counseled Marcus through his darkest days. As Emma walked down the aisle, Marcus felt a completeness he'd never experienced before, not even during his days as a walking soldier. This was what he'd been meant for. Not just to serve his country, but to love this incredible woman who had seen past his injuries to the man he truly was. "You know," Marcus said, during his vows, his voice strong and clear, "I used to think that my life ended the day I was injured. I thought that Marcus Thompson, the soldier, was the only version of myself worth being. But Emma taught me that our lives don't end when our circumstances change. They just begin a new chapter." He looked out at the faces gathered to celebrate their union, medical staff who had become family, army brothers who had stood by him, Emma's relatives who had welcomed him with open arms. "Emma, you didn't fall in love with a broken man. You fell in love with a man who was becoming whole in ways he'd never been before. You taught me that strength isn't about what our bodies can do. It's about what our hearts are willing to give, and I give you my heart, completely and forever." Emma's vows were equally moving, speaking about how Marcus had shown her that true courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to love fully despite that fear. Their life together wasn't without challenges. There were days when Marcus struggled with depression, when the limitations of his disability felt overwhelming. There were times when Emma felt the weight of being both wife and caregiver. But they faced these challenges together, with honesty and patience and unwavering commitment to their love. Marcus returned to service in a different capacity, working with the VA to help other wounded warriors navigate their own journeys of recovery. Emma continued her nursing career, eventually becoming the head of the spinal cord injury unit where they'd met. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been injured?" Emma asked him one evening, 5 years after their wedding. As they watched their 2-year-old daughter take her first steps across their living room, Marcus considered the question seriously, then shook his head. I think everything happened exactly as it was supposed to. I needed to be broken before I could be whole. I needed to lose everything before I could find what really mattered. He reached over and took his wife's hand, watching their daughter giggle as she toddled between her parents. Besides, if I hadn't been injured, I never would have met the love of my life, and I definitely wouldn't trade that for the ability to walk. Emma squeezed his hand, understanding completely. I love you, Marcus Thompson. I love you too, Emma Thompson. All of me loves all of you, forever. Marcus Thompson's story reminds us that heroism takes many forms. Sometimes it's charging into battle to protect your fellow soldiers. Sometimes it's learning to love yourself when everything you thought defined you has been taken away. And sometimes it's having the courage to open your heart to love, even when you're convinced you have nothing left to offer. At Heart of a Soldier, we believe that our greatest victories aren't always won on battlefields. They're won in hospital rooms and rehabilitation centers, in moments of vulnerability and courage, in the decision to keep fighting even when the war is happening inside your own heart. Marcus and Emma's love story teaches us that true strength isn't measured by what our bodies can do, but by what our hearts are willing to give. It shows us that sometimes the most beautiful relationships are born not from perfection, but from the courage to be vulnerable, to accept help, and to believe that we are worthy of love, exactly as we are. Their daughter is now 5 years old, and she's growing up understanding that her father isn't defined by his wheelchair. He's defined by his courage, his kindness, and his unwavering love for his family. She's learning that real heroes come in all forms, and that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with weapons, but with hope. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Heart of a Soldier. Remember, courage isn't just about facing the enemy. It's about facing yourself, your fears, your limitations, and choosing to love anyway. It's about understanding that our worth isn't determined by what we can do, but by who we choose to be. Until next time, honor those who serve, cherish those who love us unconditionally, and never forget that sometimes our greatest strength is revealed not when we're standing tall, but when we're learning to rise again.